Blessings, beloveds. Welcome back to my channel, Anastasia, Cosmic Astrology with you guys. Wanting to talk about Saturn opposite Venus. So transiting Venus and transiting Saturn. Here's the chart for today, 15th of July, 2019. This chart is done for Melbourne. So again, don't worry about the location of where everything is because it's going to change based on your own location. But what I really want to talk about today is this transit between Saturn and Venus. And I want to bring into it just a situation that occurred in my own personal life relating to one of my best friends. And it's a very sad story, but it's also an incredibly powerful demonstration of transits in your own chart and just how literal things can manifest as well. So perhaps I'll start with the story of what happened to my closest friend. So in her own chart at the moment, in her own transits, what she has is transiting Saturn forming a square to her Venus. Now, usually that transit is a triple transit, meaning that Saturn will form a square to her Venus over the period of about 12 to 18 months, and it will form an exact square over 3 hits, which is why it's called a triple transit. And it's important to understand that because that transit, first of all, a Saturn-Venus transit is extremely unpleasant, if I'm going to be perfectly honest. There are some good things that can come out of it, but you've got to do, unfortunately, you've got to do a lot of hard work around it. It's work on your own self to begin with, but it's also work in the world of relationships. Obviously, if you're in one, it's going to really color your experience in relationships. And even if you've just been in a relationship for a short time, whether it's a long time, obviously it will manifest. Its intensity will be different based on first of all, the nature of the relationship and certainly how long you've been in it as well. So Saturn-Venus transit is by no means a walk in the park, and it's not a joyful experience, as I said. It can imply karmic sort of themes that come up as well that need to be resolved and addressed. It brings up matters of loneliness, restriction, fear, feeling disconnected from your partner, even though your partner could be right there with you, trying to comfort you in some kind of way, that there's something within your own self that could just feel quite cut off. It's a very typical manifestation of Saturn to Venus. Now, you've got to think about what these archetypes represent. You know, Venus is always about joy and pleasure, right? And naturally, it's got to do with our own sense of enjoyment in life, the things we value, the things we love and enjoy. That includes things we eat, things we wear, music we listen to, places we love, people we love, relationships, friendships. So it includes a number of different things, but fundamentally, it speaks to our own inner sense of worth and value. So transiting Saturn coming along, you know, Saturn is always about growth and development at its highest sort of vibrational level. But Saturn, we can't grow through Saturn until we actually face the responsibilities and the duty that's involved around the development that needs to take place. So it's always a question of what are the lessons that Saturn is trying to basically teach you. That's just a little bit about what a Saturn-Venus transit would imply. Naturally, a conjunction, square, or opposition, slightly different in terms of what they produce, but they're all equally very, very difficult, just simply because of the nature of what Saturn produces. It's the hard work that we have to we have to get realistic about our situation, our life circumstances, specifically pertaining to relationships, money, and just aspects of our own inner self, how we see ourselves, how far we've developed in our life. What is it that we've outgrown? What is it that we need to become more serious about, consider more, and what is it that we need to work on, right? That's what Saturn's going to bring up. But frequently the Saturn brings up a lot of resistance. So, Venus tries to resist Saturn, but she can't, because Saturn has the ultimate sort of say, if you like, in terms of what Venus will experience during this transit. And I'm sort of elaborating a bit more and going into a bit more depth, even though this transiting chart we are looking at on the screen right now, it's transiting Venus and transiting Saturn. But this particular transit is only active really for about 2 or 3 days. The point is this, though, that going back to my friend's situation, she has transiting Saturn squaring her natal Venus, as I said. Now, if you can just imagine her chart, just imagine that she has Venus in her 6th house. And the 6th house connects to a number of different things, but one thing it actually speaks to is the pets that we own, such as dogs and cats, most typical example. Can be lots of other different animals, but it's all, the 6th house is small animals, all little type of creatures like birds, could be a rat, mouse, cat, dog, snake, things like that. Larger animals such as elephants and horses and things like that, they belong to the 12th house, by the way, just for your own reference. So what happened to my friend is that she had to put her cat down because it had unfortunately developed quite a serious illness, which there was no treatment for, and this cat was in a fair bit of discomfort, which was just, you could say, cruel to keep her going in the state that she was. And look, everyone will have different views about that, and it's not the point. The point is this, that this transit that my friend has in her own life, which is Saturn square Venus, and she's been having it all of this year, and this was the second hit that actually happened just a few days ago. And so a few days ago she has Saturn squaring her Venus, exactly, and then today we see that transiting Saturn just in the heavens right now is forming an opposition to Venus. So it just, what happens is this: when you have a Saturn Venus transit in your own chart, not in the heavens in terms of the aspect or transit we are looking at right now, but this is important, so just bear with me. When you are having a Saturn Venus aspect, and as I said, it will be for more than a 12-month period, and it brings up all the issues that I mentioned previously, but obviously we could go deeper into those things, but it would just make this video an hour long. I don't want to do that right now. The point I'm trying to make is this, that she has the transiting Saturn square her Venus. Venus is in her 6th house, which rules pets, and she had to have that animal put down. Now that is that transit is reflecting that particular experience that she had, because Venus rules her 6th house, which is pets, and Saturn can frequently be separation, loss, denial, cutting off, disconnection. So in this case, whilst it may be playing out in various other ways in her life, which I'm not going to go into, I just want to bring in this factor of how it literally described her losing her pet, having to, even more importantly, it wasn't just that she lost it, but she had to make that really hard, cold, realistic decision, which is Saturn. That's Saturn's energy, forces us to make these hardcore, real decisions that require tremendous responsibility, and they're hard. They're really hard because they hit in the heart, and they cause us to make a decision that is so extremely painful and unpleasant, but we're literally left with no choice. And this is a perfect example of that. Now, this animal was only just put down yesterday, which is just 14th of July, a day before this chart we're looking at. And this is the important point, that she has the Saturn square Venus in her own chart via transit. And then what reinforces even more what actually happened yesterday is this transit that we're seeing in the heavens at the moment with transiting Saturn opposite Venus. So that was just another layer, if you like, that spoke to the experience that she had, right? This is an important thing to understand, because when you have really intense, significant endings, changes, separations, crises, confronting situations in your life, it will be reflected usually by a very significant transit in your own chart, but there'll be other layers of other things that will also show what is actually happening. In this case, this transiting chart alone is just another layer to add onto this person's own Saturn-Venus transit that she's got going. You see, so when an important thing happens, it's not, it's almost never seen just through one thing going on in the chart. And I know this for a fact because I've been working with astrology for 25 years to begin with, and I've seen it over and over and over again in all different, different people's charts that I've worked with and so forth. And certainly in my own life, when it has come to very significant transitions, losses, changes, separations, deaths, endings, unfortunately, all the really painful experiences in this life, it has always been reflected through the transits that are happening to my own chart, the transits that are happening in the heavens at the same time. Progressions also can be another way where things are being reinforced again, and another technique called primary directions. Also, the secondary progressed moon can also be another added layer. And as I've said before a few times, and I'll say it again, for me, the biggest turning point in my life and the biggest loss I've experienced is when my father transcended 2 years ago, just over 2 years ago. And whilst I've mentioned it a few times, I still have not been able to sit down and do a video on the astrology of what was going on in my own chart when my father left this world. I will get to the point where I can do it, but I still can't. It's just, just not in that space to be able to do that. But I'm mentioning it again because that was the most powerful experience in my life, and everything that was going on in my own chart at that time, my father's leaving this world, his transcendence, was reflected through probably about 4 or 5 different techniques of things that were actually happening to my own natal chart. And I'm highlighting this, and I'm highlighting what has happened to my friend, because if you're serious about understanding astrology and you really want to get to deeper levels of working with it, this is a very important message. It's very important to understand the power of not only transits to your own chart, but a number of other different things that will be reflecting through their own measure or technique the exact same one experience. So in the case of my friend, whilst I didn't look at any of her progressions and things of that nature, I just didn't have the time to go into that today, but this is still a powerful example because we have transiting Saturn opposite transiting Venus in the heavens as I speak, and in her own chart she has transiting Saturn squaring her Venus. And in her case, as I said, the Venus is in her 6th house, which rules pets, and as I said, Saturn frequently brings up matters of separation, which are really, really painful. So for those of you have Venus in Aries, you have either had the transit from Saturn squaring your Venus this year, It might have been last year, because it just depends on the degree of your Venus, because currently transiting Saturn is at 16 degrees of Capricorn going retrograde, as we can see on the screen here, right? And transiting Venus is at 14 degrees of Cancer. Now, this is not an exact opposition, but this is an important point to help you understand aspects, which is my next point of this video. So you can see here Venus is at 14 Cancer, Saturn is at 16 Capricorn, Saturn is going retrograde. Now if I animate this chart and step it by one day at a time, which takes us into obviously tomorrow's transits, the day after tomorrow and so forth, we can see live what's happening in the heavens through this wonderful little application with solar fire. So I stepped forward no, I haven't done that yet. I'm about to do it. So let's go to the 16th of July, which is tomorrow for me. You can see that Venus has moved around about a degree. She's moved to 15 now. So what's happening is, let me just take it back to the 15th of July. This is not an exact opposition, but it is an opposition that has already been activated because of the close proximity. In other words, this opposition is only around about 2 degrees apart, right? If you count from 14 to get to 16, right? It's 2, isn't it? So it's 2 degrees. So this energy, this vibration of transiting Saturn opposite Venus in the heavens has already kicked in. The energy of it has already started activating what is going to manifest in people's lives. Now, for people who are not having a transiting Saturn Venus in their own chart, then this transit will simply be, most likely today and for the next couple of days, some tension, some conflict, some issues that will just be highlighted in one's relationships. And it won't be something that just comes up, out of the blue. Usually things that come up that require a critical sort of attention are things that are bubbling beneath the surface. And when you get a transit like this, then all this transit does is it activates that particular issue in a person's relationship or a couple's relationship, and it just brings it up so that it actually has an opportunity to be resolved. But the resolution has to come through some kind of conflict, some kind of discomfort, some kind of challenge, some kind of crisis, right? This is just the nature of Saturn. It's just what it does. So for those of you who actually have Venus in Cancer natally, and there'll be many of you out there that have that, you too are experiencing a Saturn-Venus transit in your own chart, right? Which will be happening all this year, or it could happen next year, or it could have happened last year. It just depends on the degrees of your Venus. Getting back to this transit here, so 15th of July, Venus is at 14. If we go to the 16th, she moves a degree forward, which you can see. She's 15. Now, what's happened to Saturn? Nothing, because Saturn moves very, very slowly in comparison to Venus, particularly. Venus moves around the entire chart in about a year's time, whereas Saturn moves around the entire chart in 29 years' time. So there's a vast difference between their orbit around the sun and their movement around the chart, right? Which is why this particular transit is only active really for 2 or 3 days. Now, if we step forward again and take it to the 17th of July, we can see that Venus has now reached the 16th degree of Cancer, which brings her almost exactly opposite Saturn. I say almost because, yes, they're at the same degree in opposite signs, which is an opposition. However, if you look at the minutes, what you can see is this number here, 35. This is letting us know that Venus on this particular day is at 16 degrees, 35 minutes. So what Venus has been doing since the 15th of July, she's closing in to form an exact opposition to Saturn. This closing in is called an applying aspect. These are technical words that are really, really important, because an applying aspect has a different vibration to a separating aspect, and I'll explain that more in a moment. So what we're looking at now is an applying opposition between Venus and Saturn. Now, if I step it forward one more day and take it to the 18th of July, Venus has moved past Saturn. So this now has become what's called separating aspect. So to put it very simply, pardon me, an applying aspect is letting us know that the vibration of these two planets has been activated at a particular point. In this case, it started on the 15th of July. So the activation starts to, it's kind of like if you're boiling water, just to use a very basic visual metaphor. You're boiling water on the stove, and as the water just starts to get warm and it starts to generate some heat, that's Venus applying to Saturn. She's just building herself up to getting in closer proximity to forming an exact opposition. When that water is fully boiled, like completely boiled, and you need to take it off the stove, that's Venus being exactly opposite Saturn. She's reached her peak point in terms of forming an exact opposition. The water's completely boiled. As you take it off the stove to let it sit, or whatever the case, that's the separating. That's now Venus starting to separate away from being exactly opposite Saturn. So the intensity and the volume of that water bubbling up and being extremely hot, because you've taken it off the stove, it starts to cool down a bit, doesn't it? So that's the same thing. It's a metaphor just to help you understand the intensity of an applying aspect or a separating aspect, because this concept of applying and separating is happening all the time with any aspect that you look at, with any planet that you look at. This is a phenomena that is happening all the time, and it is important to be able to distinguish when an aspect is applying or separating, because it has a different level of intensity and therefore it manifests in different ways as well. It's the same principle applies to your own natal birth chart. Now, if you look at your own natal birth chart, there are aspects happening all over the shop, right, between all the planets in your chart, and there'll be a number of different aspects. Now, to put it very simple, if you had, say this was your birth chart that we're looking at right here, right now, let's find an aspect that we can work with. I want to try and keep this simple. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to change this chart to another date in order to simplify what I'm trying to demonstrate. So just bear with me while I capture what I'm trying to capture here. Okay. So let's just say that this was your birthday, or you had a baby born on this day, right? 22nd of August, 2019. That date doesn't even matter. What matters is what I'm about to show you. If you look up here in the 9th house of this chart, you can see that Venus is now at 0 degrees of Virgo, 59 minutes, and Mars is at 2 degrees of Virgo, 30 minutes. Now, what does this look like? A conjunction, right? This is a conjunction. For those of you that don't know, a conjunction just simply means two planets side by side. Now, tricky thing is about conjunctions, when you're not really familiar with astrology to a certain extent, something you might overlook is, pardon me, a conjunction can still be present while the two planets are in totally different signs. So that would be an out of sign conjunction, but it's still a conjunction. However, it will play out differently because you're talking about two planets being conjunct, but in two totally different signs, which may be very complicated because maybe the two signs sitting side by side have absolutely nothing in common. That's one factor. The other factor is that the conjunction you are assessing at any time, the first thing you need to understand is, well, what is the nature of the two planets side by side forming this conjunction? What do these planets have in common, if anything at all? How different are they? That's going to tell you a lot about how this conjunction is going to operate. Another thing you need to understand is that the faster moving planet is always going to be dictated to by the slower moving planet in the conjunction. So you need to know which planets move, or you need to know the rate of every single planet, how fast they move, how slow they move, because you need to be able to determine, well, which planet is going to overtake the other planet in the conjunction. And it's always going to be the slower moving planet that's going to dictate its terms to the faster moving planet. I'm pointing to this conjunction here by way of example because Mars is the slower moving planet in this conjunction. Why? Because Venus moves faster than Mars. Even though these two planets are very fast moving planets in the heavens, out of the two, Mars is the slower one, okay, because Venus moves faster. Now, this is an applying conjunction because Venus is at 0 and Mars is at 2. If I step forward, I'm going to now change this to days because Venus moves very quickly. So let's go to the 23rd of August. 23rd of August, just a day later, Venus has jumped to 2 degrees. So she's moving pretty fast because in one day she's moved 2 degrees, right? We just looked at her a day ago where she was 0. This is still an applying conjunction. Applying because she hasn't reached Mars yet. It'll be exact. This conjunction will be exact when these two planets are on the same degree, same minute. So let's step forward again. Now we've moved to the 24th of August. And you can see that both Mars and Venus are both at 3 degrees of Virgo. Are they exact? No, they're not, because this is getting very technical, and some of you may not be interested in this, but for those of you that are serious, really serious about astrology, this is a very, very, very valuable lesson. These two are they're exact in terms of the degree, right? And the vibration of this conjunction is potent, extremely potent at this time while they are on the same degree. However, if you want to get technical, what you need to notice is that Mars is at 47 minutes, Venus is at 27 minutes. So they're 20 minutes apart. Now, 20 minutes doesn't sound like a long time, but it is. Now, in order to get that exactness, what I need to do is take this little step-by thing to minutes at a time. So I'm going to step forward 1 minute at a time, which is going to take us a little bit of time. I might have to actually adjust that just to make it a little bit quicker. Let's go 15 minutes. So we're still on the same day, right? So this conjunction was active 5-10 minutes ago when I, was adjusting the minutes. Now let's just continue to step it forward. You can see that Venus is still moving relatively slow. She's only jumped to 30 minutes. She was 27, wasn't she? So I've moved it forward by about half an hour, and she's only moved 3 minutes. This is astrological minutes, right? It's different to the minutes on your clock, your watch. Step forward again. Now Venus is still 3 degrees, 30 minutes. Let's keep going. Let's just keep going. I'm flicking by pretty quickly so I can just get to the point. Getting very close now. Where are we? Okay, we've gone a bit too far there. All right. Now you see I have to adjust this again. You see how technical this gets? You can see now that Venus is 352, Mars is 359. So Venus is only a few minutes behind Mars. So let's just take it 1 minute at a time to, oh, okay. So this is very interesting because what happens is now Mars has moved on to another degree. So this is where it starts to get a bit fickly. Okay, let's just take it forward again. Anyway, look, essentially, if I just keep going forward with this, I don't want to bore you because it might be a bit boring for some of you, but if I keep adjusting this in order to get these two planets to what's called a partile conjunction, which is exactness, right? Means same degree, same minute. And to be even more technical, we've got to get it to the same second, but you've got to go into a totally different section to establish that. And that just gets a little bit too technical, so I won't worry about that. But what I'm really trying to teach you guys here is the importance of an applying conjunction when the two planets become exactly conjunct, and then as the two planets start to separate, which is a separating conjunction or any other aspect for that matter. These are very technical points, but these points become really crucial when you're trying to establish timing of events. When you're working with transits, which is one form of forecast or prediction, if you want to use that word, then this business of seeing exactness of aspects when they form their exact conjunction, opposition, or square, just to use those three aspects, there's many more. The exactness of when these planets come to either conjunct, square, or oppose each other is really critical in timing, because when you see the exactness, then you know the exact timing of when this particular vibration is 100% activated at its exact point. These are technical things, but as I said, they are very, very important if you want to get serious about astrology. So getting back to this chart of today, for those of you, as I said, that have Venus in Cancer in your chart natally, you will be experiencing Saturn opposite your Venus, whether it was last year, this year, or next year. For those of you that have Venus in Aries, same deal, last year, this year, or next year, Saturn will square your Venus. For those of you that have Venus in Libra, it's the same thing again. Saturn will be forming a square to your Venus. It would have happened last year, this year, or next year. This is an incredibly important transit for you guys personally, because it's going to speak to your own personal psychological development when it comes to your responsibility and your understanding about the world of relationships for you. So obviously it's going to be a different experience based on gender, based on your age, based on your level of consciousness, and certainly based on the circumstances in your life. So we always need to look at all these variables, all these different aspects of a person's life, because all of us are going to have a Saturn-Venus transit at some point in our life. And it's going to be a different experience for all of us, depending on the factors that I just discussed. But in addition to that, Saturn transiting Saturn to personal planets are really difficult transits, in my opinion. I've never seen anybody, for instance, say, yeah, I'm having a transiting Saturn square my Venus and I'm absolutely having a ball. I've never heard anyone say that, because it's just not the reality of what this energy produces. Now, pardon me, I've got a really froggy throat today. So when you have this aspect, you are either going to withdraw when you have this transiting Saturn aspecting your Venus. Now, if you are one of those people that has Venus in Libra, Cancer, I've left out Capricorn actually, because if you have Venus in Capricorn, then Saturn is actually conjunct your Venus. So what we are really talking about is the cardinal signs, the cardinal cross. The cardinal signs are Cancer, Aries, Capricorn, and Libra. That's the cardinal cross. So for any of you with Venus in any of those signs, and I'm just talking about Venus today because we could actually apply this to Mars. We could apply this to any other planet, really. We are just simply focusing on Venus today. Any of you that have Venus in any of these cardinal signs will be experiencing transiting Saturn in conjunction, square, or opposition. And all those aspects are really, really challenging. Challenging doesn't mean, though, that it's a useless waste of time. In fact, quite the opposite. It will produce very powerful results, particularly if you have a lot of awareness and you are ready to really be real about looking at yourself and looking at your relationships. If you're not, then the chances are you will deny, repress, withdraw, reject this vibration. And usually when people do that, it makes it even more difficult because it just feels like you are suffering for no reason at all. And that's because you're not able to do the work around it, to look at yourself or to look at your relationships, to look at how you relate to people, to look at your responsibility on your side in terms of how you give, how you share, how you love, how you relate. That's what transiting Saturn to Venus is almost always going to bring up, those sorts of questions. And if you're in a relationship, then those sorts of issues come up quite intensely because you are confronted with those issues, not just within your own self, but within the partner that stands right next to you, right in front of you. So the underlying issues in the relationship that have been suppressed or ignored or too difficult to handle become a source of great tension and difficulty during this type of transit, because Saturn, as I said, is ultimately trying to evolve your consciousness from a very different way to the evolution of Pluto. And Saturn is always about hard work. Sorry to say, guys, I know that may sound a little bit pessimistic, but that's just a reality. However, as I said, if you are the sort of person that's really willing to work through things, yeah, it's still going to be a painful experience. You're still going to have to confront some stuff that you not really looking forward to. But if you are prepared to do it, there's tremendous growth that will subsequently be recognized. But the point is that when you're going through this Saturn-Venus transit, it just feels like hard work, and it feels like, why do I have to do this? This is bullshit. This is just really hard. Why am I being confronted with these sorts of situations? And as I said, if you're not able to address the issues that come up and you somehow swipe them under the carpet, then the experience will be even more difficult because it'll just feel like you are suffering for no reason. In other words, there's no purpose to this. But when you are able to identify some kind of purpose relating to your own growth and development and maturity, because Saturn is always trying to teach us maturity and responsibility, and it's growing pains. If this is happening when you're in your 20s, it's literally growing pains, and in your teens, of course. But if this happens to you when you're in your 30s and 40s, then, it's really, and it's a challenging transit, it's really trying to get your attention to stuff that you've been, patterns of behavior, for instance, that you've had most of your life that keep repeating in relationships, and Saturn will just keep bringing them up, and it'll keep basically facing you and confronting you and saying, here you go, this is what you need to look at. Are you ready to look at it now? Kind of thing. And because you are older, you're in a position where you kind of really have to step back and say, okay, well, I have to get a little bit more serious about how I'm behaving in my relationships, how I'm relating in my relationships. What is it about my own self that I may need to further examine and look at, certain behaviors that I have that I've been in denial of, or, just haven't recognized before. So a Saturn-Venus transit can be incredible in terms of your own psychological and emotional development, and also just simply the things that you can really strengthen within your own self to essentially start to have better relationships, healthier relationships, relationships that have a stronger sense of foundation, stronger sort of structures and boundaries, things like that. So it can be good on those levels, but the point is that you won't feel it while you're going through the transit. You usually will see the result, the fruits that you will recognize will essentially come when you complete the transit, which is when that transit has finished doing its journey, right? When Saturn has finished doing its journey with Venus in your chart, for instance. And that transit, as I said, is usually over a year long. So it's quite a long time. It's not a short transit. So it really does get your attention whether you like it or not. And some of the other common sort of experiences, and I want to point this out because there'll be a lot of you having this transit, if you're feeling sort of cut off from friends, feeling a little bit more isolated, feeling that your friends are not there for you as much, a lot of that is in your own psyche, but it's getting projected out through this transit. So you start to see it in your environment around you with regards to your social network, for instance, because there's a necessary component with Saturn and Venus to actually experience this sense of isolation or disconnection, not to an extremity where, it creates some kind of black depression and you feel completely cut off from the world. That's pretty heavy and pretty serious, and I would be recommending very specific things if that was the case. But if it's at a lighter level, which is typically going to be the experience for the majority of the planet, of people on the planet with this transit, it does force you into your own self again. And the reason it does that is because it's trying to get you to reevaluate your own values and worth about your own self. And how much awareness do you have about that in terms of how you step into the world of relationships? What is your responsibility in that? How serious do you take it? Things of that nature. So it's ultimately about your growth and development, but it's growing pains. It's experiencing a sense of disconnection from a lot of things, from having fun, actually, because as I said at the beginning of this video, Venus is in your chart. Venus speaks to whatever you basically enjoy in your life, what brings you a sense of happiness, right? Enjoyment and pleasure. And so Saturn to Venus means that you're not going to experience essentially a lot of fun and joy and pleasure when Saturn is forming this conjunction, square, or opposition. And you can understand that when you really think about it, because if it didn't have that effect, if it didn't take away that sense of pleasure and enjoyment, then you wouldn't even look at these things that are really important that you need to look at and address, right, and resolve and work on. Because let's face it, the reality is when we're all, when everything's a walk in the park, or you're blissed out, or you're just having a great time, there's no way in hell that you're going to look at the difficult components of your life. Why should you when you're having this fantastic time? That's why these transits come along, because otherwise we wouldn't face the things that we need to face that help us grow and become more conscious. Okay, so I think that's enough to give you a pretty good sense of Saturn-Venus transit. And as I said, if you are having a Saturn-Venus transit, then these few days, well, we are having this transiting Saturn opposite transiting Venus in the heavens, just as a separate transit to your transit in your chart, then these days I expect will probably be quite difficult. So if they are, this is the reason why. And this is the reason why I wanted to do this video, because if there are really critical things coming up and going on, and they are really highlighted during these few days, what I would suggest is to really not make any firm decisions or take any severe action towards any particular matters in your life relating to money or relationships or even friendships, because the vibration of this transit in the heavens at the moment will be extremely magnified for those of you that have transiting Saturn forming an aspect to your natal Venus at the moment. And it'll be so that the energy is so dense and so heavy, and can feel it can make you feel so sort of blocked or restricted or limited, or just really down, make you feel really, really down about something quite personal that's going on in your life. And your perspective on it will be colored, unfortunately, through this Saturn-Venus transit that's happening in the heavens. And you are only viewing it through, unfortunately, this very dim, narrow, dense sort of energy of Saturn, which is not the true sort of reality of things. This is an important point because, as I said, in the next few days, I mean, look, there are situations where decisions need to be made. In the case of my friend, she could not prolong the life of this particular cat, and that was a cold, hard decision she had to make, pure and simple, very, very painful, but that's Saturn, causing her to make that realistic and practical decision in order to alleviate the suffering of this beautiful little cat that just couldn't go on the way it was. So when it comes to a situation like that, obviously decisions do need to be made. But what I'm saying is that if there are other situations that still haven't reached a climax point where a very specific decision needs to be made, especially if you're talking about the safety of either an animal or another human, or well-being, then it is better to step back and just allow this energy to pass, because when it does pass, you will be able to see it with just a little bit more light, right? A perspective that is not completely colored through this depressive kind of energy, right? So just be aware of that, guys, because this can be very, very useful if you're aware of it and if you're paying attention. And it might just stop you from doing something that, if you could see it from a different light, you wouldn't have made that decision. Okay, so there it is, a very powerful example with my friend's cat and so forth. And I think I've talked quite a bit about the importance of applying separating aspects, the intensity of how that shows up when it's applying, when it's separating, and the various layers that can point to when it comes to something really critical that's happening in your life. It will be reflected through a number of different levels, and I've just used 2 levels today to demonstrate that to you, in case you are not working like this, or you haven't come across this before, or whatever the case. So needless to say, this energy is challenging. Whilst, and just to finish up, whilst I don't have a Saturn-Venus transit in my own chart happening at the moment, this Saturn-Venus, just this transit that's happening in the heavens of this chart that I'm looking at, that you guys are looking at on the screen right now, you see that when my friend, when I called my friend today because I found out what had happened, that was really hurtful. It was really painful to hear that. Why? Because she's one of my best friends, and because I'm, a huge, huge animal lover, and loss is something that's been pretty intense in my life as well the last couple of years. So this is just another example of, even though I don't have transiting Saturn doing anything to my natal Venus, just this transit in the heavens had an impact on me through this particular example that I've just shared with you guys. So there's just another way of seeing the manifestation of this little transit that's only active for 2 or 3 days, right? So this is the power of astrology. It's so freaking powerful, to say the least. Okay, I will leave it here for now. And thanks to all of you for watching my videos and taking the time to listen and learn and share and comment in the community section as well. Sending you all much love and blessings, and look forward to seeing you guys very, very soon. Okay, bye for now.